вперлася москальня, казавши на парад Київ йде, любим сусідам руський мір принесе. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Десь у полях, танки ворожі шукав собі шлях, а фермери українські ті танки знайшли і собі на тракторі додому потягли. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Україна засіває в землю руські добрива. Каже Пісков, що потерь у нас нет, з неба летить вам Байрактара привет. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Україна стала до бою і міцна, як стіна. Б'є ЗСУ, артилерія б'є, жоден москаль у наш дім не зайде. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир. Нет, Владимир, нет, Владимир, брешеш ти усьому світу, що ти за мир.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великой страны.
Найкращий пастух баранячий хотар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні. У нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів. Робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російська поліція справи заводить, там пивцю рашистів ніяк не знаходить. Хто винен, що в нашому полі глухар? Байрактар, Байрактар. Веде пропаганду кремлівський урод, слова пропаганди ковтає народ. Тепер нове слово знає цар.
Байрактар.
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 Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, everybody, and welcome back to day 133 of the news.
And of course, we're going to be reporting on the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine here on day 133. And we have some really interesting news today, as we've seen Ukrainian forces, as far as we can tell, continue to withdraw, hopefully to better defensive positions, as it appears that they are still on the move westwards. So we'll of course be covering that here in a bit. I think that's actually, while some people may think that's a bad thing, I'm actually thinking it's a good thing. It shows that there may be some foresight and pre-planning into what their I guess you could say defensive actions would be after Lysychansk fell. But beyond that, we have seen a massive amount of activity around Kherson today. We have 4 videos from the Kherson area, which is the highest amount of news that we've ever gotten since this war started 4 months ago in the Kherson area. So of course, we're going to be looking forward to cover that. And speaking of covering all of this news, let's get into the schedule for tonight. We're actually going to be starting off in Russia, the only bit of news we have in Russia that I consider Russian news, because honestly, Belgrad's almost become a normal part of the Kharkiv front, so I kind of consider it part of the Kharkiv segment. But once we cover this news kind of in the Grozny area, it's really more on the Stavropol area, we'll then be moving on into the location unknown news. After we cover the Russian news and the location unknown news, we'll then be moving on to the Kharkiv area. But of course, we're going to take a quick pause and answer 3 questions from the chat. After we answer those 3 questions, we'll then be moving on into the Kharkiv area, and then also the entirety of the Donbass. This will include Izium, the Luhansk region, and the Donetsk region as well, all in one segment. After we cover all of that news from Kharkiv to Donetsk, we'll then be moving on down into the southern front and the Kherson area. But of course, before we get there, we're going to take another pause and answer another 3 questions from the chat. After we answer those 3 questions, we'll then be moving on into the southern front, the Kherson region, and then we have one bit of news that's an outlier near Lviv that we'll be covering. And then finally, we'll round out tonight's news with a speech from President Zelensky. I would like to point out tonight that this is rounding out another week. Day 133 is the end of another whole 7 days of war in Ukraine. And if we were to whip out a calculator, because I'm going to be honest, I failed math for the most part in school. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but kind of true. 133 divided by 7 is 19. And so this is rounding out the 19th week. Well, actually, this is rounding out the 18th week of the war, and it's now going to be going into the 19th week of war. Western analysts, just to say this again, because I've never said this in ages, and I still think it's something that rings true and people should think about. Western analysts all around the world did not believe that Ukraine would survive longer than 3 days, and at the longest, it would only survive a week. Everyone was so vehement on this belief that the United States government acted on it and asked Zelensky if he wanted a ride out of the country. And in response to that, Zelensky said the famous words that will most likely go down in history. He said, "I need ammunition, not a ride." And then the war of Ukraine was on for sure. And here we are, rounding out the 18th week of the war, 4.5 months later, and Ukraine still stands, and they're doing fairly well. I have to say, right now, and I would like to preface it with this, Ukraine has not crushed the Russians, that is true. But the Ukrainians are facing a country that militarily should be far more powerful than them, economically far more powerful than them as well, and should be wiping the floor with the Ukrainians. Yet somehow, the Ukrainians, through incredible training, support from all around the world, and just high morale and belief in their own country, have been able to hold their nation for an inconceivable amount of time that has shocked everyone around the world and has become such commonplace, this sort of excellence from the average Ukrainian soldier, that no one even really thinks about the war, even in Ukraine. We've been seeing the war disappearing a little bit more each day as the news goes on in the mainstream networks. They continue to cover the war less and less. Yet these brave soldiers continue on with the same tenacity and fervor that they had within those opening days of the war. And I just have to say, it's an absolute testament to them that we're now rounding out our 18th week of the war and we're going into the 19th. At this point, I'm going to say, I don't know how long this war could go on. It could go on for months. It could go on for several years. But I have to say that the Ukrainians have certainly written their own page in the history books that people will be looking at from times forward. So with that, without further ado, I hope y'all enjoyed the little speech I gave there at the end of this week, and of course, if you would like to take a look at this map and all of the news that we've collected over the course of the past 7 days, the link is in the description below to this map. You can check out each link individually. We're now going to be moving on to our first bit of news from inside of Russia, near the town of Stavropol. Here today, we saw a chemical plant catch on fire. We've been seeing a large amount of factories and, I guess you could say, industries that are related to the production of war materials catching on fire and burning. Now, some of these may be to raw negligence. I will not rule that out, because the Russians, by and large, seem rather incompetent, at least on the military side of things. But it could equally be sabotage as well. And every single fire that's occurred in Russia since the start of this war cannot be raw negligence. Some of it must be sabotage. And so we've seen another chemical plant catch on fire, and it's great to see that regardless whether it be incompetence or sabotage, the Russians are not having an easy time on the home front with the production of war materials to continue this thing on. With that, we're now going to be moving on from Russia, and we're now going to be moving immediately into Ukraine, starting off with our first bit of location unknown news, showing a Ukrainian sabotage attack. I actually showed this in the short clips today, and it was a very interesting look, because these guys really remind me, if y'all remember, of clips from the 80s. Some of y'all may be old enough to remember that. And also, some of y'all may not remember that, but this clip right here actually reminds me a lot of clips and videos we would get at Mujahideen fighters in Afghanistan that were fighting the Soviets during the 80s. And while, you know, of course, ideologically, they're incredibly different, the resemblance is striking in how these guys look, the weapons they're using, and kind of the terrain they're on here. And so without further ado, here's the video. You see them moving forward in a somewhat spread out line, and we can see that they've apparently picked out their targets as they're now setting up a line across this ridge, and they're surveying what they're about to shoot at. Now, they're going to fire the RPGs first, and after the RPGs fire and give the initial shock of this ambush, then the rest of the guns, like the machine guns, are going to light up whatever is in the distance. Sadly, we don't see what they're firing at, but we do see that apparently the first 2 RPG shots do hit, because the return fire is incredibly low and almost non-existent. We can now see him blowing out the tube of the RPG to make sure that there's no grass or anything coming out of the backblast. We can now see him standing up and stepping forward to fire off his RPG. And then he fires the shot heard around the world, I guess you could say. We can hear it hit, and the rest of the unit starts lighting up the Russians that are in the distance. We hear a second RPG go off, and then the video ends. Well, actually, we can hear a third RPG go off there, so they were just hitting him with every single round that they had for the RPGs. The video ends right there. Sadly, we don't see the Russian vehicles down range, but it did seem like they were hitting them pretty hard. And of course, we can't confirm what kind of losses that the Russians got, because we couldn't see them on film. And of course, we only talk about things we can see on film. But based off of the smallest amount of return fire we heard, because we heard a tiny bit in there, but it was almost non-existent, I'm going to assume that they hit them hard enough that most of the unit was already knocked out or in such shock that return fire didn't even cross their minds. So apparently it was a very successful attack, and it's very interesting to see the kind of sabotage and, I guess you could say, behind-the-lines partisan attacks that Ukrainian forces have been conducting, and actually see video evidence of it for once. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of location unknown news, where we see drones destroying some Russian vehicles. Of course, these are from the Arab Zivka unit, which has become incredibly famous at this point because it is, of course, a civilian-based unit that's using their own drones that they were using for recreational purposes to bomb the Russians with. We can see some infrared footage here from one of the cameras on the drones, most likely an R-18. And now they're surveying these surroundings and looking for poor, unsuspecting Russians to drop a bomblet on. It looks like they just found one. It looks like a main battle tank of a sort, and the bomblet's on its way, but it looks like it's just drifting off to the right side, and it just did. Of course, the drone's about to adjust. We see it doing that right now. And unlike the normal saying, third time's the charm, usually the second time is the charm. We can now see them dropping a bomblet onto a KAMAZ truck, and this one appears to fall right to the side, but with a soft truck like a KAMAZ, some of that shrapnel may have actually damaged the vehicle and definitely punctured some tires. Now we can see them dropping that second bomblet on the tank we saw at the beginning of the video, and of course the second time was the charm, as the Ukrainian saying now goes, and that tank looks like it took a pretty devastating hit. That's the end of the video, but it was great to see the Ukrainians knock out another main battle tank and a KAMAZ supply truck. Now, I haven't said this in a while as well, but knocking out the KAMAZ supply truck is much more important than knocking out the tank. And, you know, there's people who may be new to the stream and may have never heard me say this before because it's been so long, but some of y'all may be wondering, why in the world would knocking out a truck be better than knocking out a tank? And the reason why is because the tank, like your car, and some of you in America right now with the rising gas prices may realize this, but your car runs on gas, so do tanks. And there has to be something that carries that gas to that tank for it to run. And so if you destroy the trucks that are able to carry the gas to the tanks will run out of gas and they will grind to a halt. And that kind of principle is pretty much the same for every single system in the tank. If the gun runs out of ammo, the tank is useless. If it runs out of spare parts, the tank is useless. And so on and so forth. So you can kind of get the picture here that destroying the truck is more important than destroying the tank, and it appears that the Ukrainians have really mastered this kind of ideology because they have constantly been going after supply depots more so than it seems they're going after frontline units at this point. And I wish that they were able to assess the kind of tonnage of supplies that they've destroyed so far through ammo depot attacks, because I think those numbers would be incredibly important to gauging how much longer the Russians can go and how strained the supply chains really are. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of footage, where we've seen an unfortunate film where a Dana SPG was destroyed. Now, before we go to this video, some of y'all may need a refresher course on what the Dana SPG looks like. It is a Czech wheeled SPG. You can see one right here. Looks really cool, and they really are pretty neat. Sadly, in this video, we will see the Russians on film destroying a Dana. A decent amount of these have been sent over, though. Unfortunately, we don't have a number. I believe it was above 30, but beyond that, I'm not really sure how much higher it is above 30. But sadly, we can see a Dana SPG right where my mouse cursor is circling, being destroyed in this clip. It got hit, unfortunately knocked out. You can also see another picture of a Dana SPG right there, and then the hit once over. It's unfortunate to see, but of course war is war, and those Ukrainian soldiers that may have died in that vehicle did not die in vain, as they have been defending this country for so long that not a single observer of this war expected Ukraine to last this long. And it's thanks to brave Ukrainian artillerists like them that Ukraine has been able to have a life for this long. With that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see a really cool sign. Now, this was a short clip, but it was a really cool little poster that it appears two bikers have made, and I'm just going to let them explain what the sign is to y'all. So, with that, here's the video.
So what does that say?
Putin, Putin's bowling. I was waiting for you.
Молодец.
Pretty nice little poster that they made there. It looks really well done too. I mean, like, someone put a lot of effort into this. But like you just heard them say, it says Putler, you know, the water is hot, or the water is boiling, hell is waiting for you. And they also put Hitler, well, they made Putin with a Hitler stash and a Hitler haircut, and also put him in an SS uniform. You can see the SS badge right there on what appears to actually be a suit. It's not the uniform. But what a decent amount of detail. And it shows you how patriotic a lot of Ukrainians are, is that someone would go through the effort to make a sign like this and stand out on the road with it just to show their support for the cause. So it's great to see, and I just wanted to show that to y'all because it was a pretty funny one. And with that, we're now going to be moving on to our next bit of Location Unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainians capturing a very prickly suspect. Now, when I say prickly, usually you think about a Russian officer or Mr. Lunchtime after he's fallen into a hedgerow. Neither of those would be the case this time. Ukrainian security is very tough, and they really catch almost anything and everything that tries to come through their checkpoints. And today we saw that they captured nothing other than a hedgehog. And it was really cute because they took a picture of it and it balled up back into a little ball. Hedgehogs are really cute, especially the ones, that you just normally find in the wild. And we can see that they found one here. Luckily, this little prickly fella did not get through the checkpoint, because if it did, it could have been a Russian spy. And hopefully, they have sent this thing back on its way into another direction. And hopefully, it's decided to not give any information to the Russians. So a cute little picture of a hedgehog that they captured at a checkpoint here. And with that, we're now going to be moving on to our the second to last bit of location unknown news, where we see a big gun with big recoil. I don't think this is a 50 caliber Beretta, but we did see that it had a pretty decent amount of recoil, regardless of what kind of gun it was. And so if the video loads, it's taking a minute. It's a big gun, so it takes a pretty good while for the video to load. We can see up here in the top corner, it doesn't say Reddit, it says Didit, which is a new website, I'm supposing. And we're just going to wait for it to load here for a second. Actually, we're going to click the refresh button. Usually that works.
Enforcer, I think we might be having a problem with the internet.
Let me check the streaming software. It appears that we shouldn't be. And also it's saying that's excellent condition on my end, so I don't think so. But let me try and open up that link again, everyone. A lot of people are saying that the stream's running okay, which is good to know. Hopefully the video will pull up, and hopefully y'all can still hear me as well. I think, wait a minute, we might be getting some progress here. We might have to revisit this video, though, if it continues to try and load like this. Can you still hear me, Matthew?